Welcome to the MindMill Podcast, where host Seth Marcus dissects and discusses all things impacting young adults. Peers, mentors, and professionals share intimate conversations on subjects such as entrepreneurship, exercise and health, music and art, the blessings and curses of technology, travel, and how to navigate adulthood in this age of information. We are the largest generation in history, and we dictate the future. The MindMill. Find your purpose, fuel your purpose.
Today's episode is with Evan Hung, co-founder and chief product officer at Nicola Power. I first discovered Nicola Power at the Techstars Sustainability Program Demo Day, where their presentation blew me away. For clarification, Techstars is an elite accelerator program for promising young companies. It has an unbelievable success rate and thus is extremely prestigious and a competitive program to be accepted in. While all of the companies demoing that day were remarkable, Nicola stood out to me. Nicola Power builds software solutions to help bridge the gap between grid power, batteries, and renewable energy sources. The future of power is in renewables, and Nicola Power provides the crucial platform for its users to switch seamlessly between optimal energy sources throughout the day. This industry is clearly complex and rapidly developing. Enter Evan Hung. Evan is an absolute wealth of knowledge and shares with us an insider look into the world of renewables, batteries, and sustainability in the workplace and at home. Between sessions of Evan schooling me in sustainability technology, we tangent into the lifestyle of the modern startup professional. We discuss work-life balance, screen addiction, rethinking success and failure, and quote, Neo-Buddhism. When Evan isn't relentlessly working to improve our relationship with energy sources, he is an avid breakdancer and pianist. In this episode, we chat on the power of music and movement to break through social barriers and build a community. Be sure to keep an eye out for what Evan and Nicola Power have coming down the road. But for now, I hope you enjoyed this MindMill Podcast episode with Evan Hung. Well, Evan Hung, welcome
Thank
to the
you so
MindMill.
much.
How
Thanks
you
for
doing?
having me. Good, man. How are you?
I'm doing great. We were just talking before the show that we both have had some little bits of travel in our life recently, and I wanted to ask you, first and foremost, how was your most recent trip?
It was great. I was in Taiwan for 2 weeks getting married, so it's kind of a complicated situation, but I had my civil ceremony in Colorado in August. Our families flew in, we just got an Airbnb, did it at the courthouse. But we still have our extended families in Taiwan that wanted to attend something, so we just had a little celebration over there. So that was the primary reason for us going, but it was a great time.
I didn't know you were going to get married, or going to make it official at least.
Yeah.
Well, congratulations,
Thank you so
man.
much. Appreciate that.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
So your partner is from Taiwan as well?
Yeah, she's Taiwanese American, as am
Okay.
I. But she grew up in LA. I grew up in Philadelphia. So we've had pretty different experiences kind of growing up. But yeah, we still have that shared Taiwanese heritage.
Is that what brought you guys together, was the shared heritage, or did you just guys...
Actually, funny enough, it is. We attended this program that's nicknamed the Love Boat. The way that I like to describe it, it's the Taiwanese version of Birthright, if people are familiar with that.
I am. It's the, donated trip to Israel.
Yeah.
But this would be with the design to kind of further the line of, in this case, Israeli heritage, and the Love Boat would be for Taiwanese heritage.
Exactly that. So
Interesting.
The government sponsored a program for us, basically as Taiwanese Americans. There's like Taiwanese Canadians and Europeans, to go back to Taiwan and learn a little bit more about our culture and our heritage. So we met at that camp in 2007, funny enough, and fell out of touch for 7 years and serendipitously ran back into each other in 2014.
In Denver?
No, actually in Taiwan. So it's kind of a crazy
Wow.
story. She went to college in San Diego and then moved to Taiwan after college. We had already fallen out of touch by then. And in 2014, I went to visit my family and found out that one of my friends from studying abroad ended up becoming her best friend living in Taiwan. So it was a really crazy situation where she was the girl that I had a huge crush on at camp, and nothing ever happened. And all of a sudden, 7 years later, there's this new opportunity to hopefully not blow it. And, it looks like it worked out. So
Good for you.
thank you.
I love those types of stories. Whenever people say it's like a small world situation, I don't buy it. I feel like these things happen for a reason. In my last travels through Europe, I had been very lucky a couple trips before. Both times had this like run into somebody where I'm like, oh my God, you're in the middle of this country. I had no idea that, just walking past somebody on the street and you happen to see them that you knew them from high school or something like that. I don't believe that it's some sort of just luck of the draw sort of thing. I think there's reasons for it at all times. And when I was in Europe, I was looking for it. I remember walking down all these different streets, keeping my eyes peeled, knowing that something was going to happen. But what ironically happened was I didn't run into anybody in Europe, but the people I met in Europe, they all met each other, like a huge group of mutual friends that I met, some in Berlin and some in Budapest. They all met later in their own trips, and we ended up having this huge kind of like now small world situation. It wasn't at the time, and now it is. And it's just the serendipity that happens all over the world. It's a beautiful thing.
Definitely. I think it's amazing to look back on scenarios in your life and kind of examine the small things that led up to that moment and how if just one small thing changed. It's not like a revolutionary concept, but sort of butterfly effect of sorts.
Like the 1 degree shift,
exactly,
right? And how that
like,
goes over the course of time.
Right. Had I not contacted her best friend who gotten lunch with someone, et cetera, then I wouldn't end up being married sitting here where I am today.
Yeah.
It's kind of incredible.
It is. And congratulations.
Thank you very much.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
So any specific highlights outside of obviously getting married in Taiwan?
Lots of food.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the things that we love to do out there. Taiwan is kind of an underrated destination, I'd say, in Asia.
I would agree.
Definitely a crown jewel of street food. It's really, really hard to go hungry there. So there's a checklist of things that I had that I wanted to eat and was able to knock out like 90% of it, which was really great.
Yeah.
And at least for me, Taiwan has always been a really nice place because I have never really been stressed while I'm there, in the sense that I've never had any real responsibilities when I visit, which is really great to just be with family, be in this new environment. I've never had a job there, right? So I've been there as a student, been there as a kid. So it's a really great place to truly, truly decompress, which has been really necessary for me, given the kind of entrepreneurial lifestyle that I've chosen over the past few years.
Yeah, and this lifestyle does not give much room for that type of true decompression.
Definitely.
Right? Even the decompression is very rigidly scheduled.
Yes,
correct?
very
It's
much,
like
very
from
much so.
3:30 to 4:45, you guys will be at peace with yourself, and then it's time to get back to work.
Yep,
right?
yep, absolutely, absolutely.
So, Evan, I don't know much about your background. Did you grow up in Taiwan, or did you grow up here in America?
No, so I grew up in the States. I grew up right outside of Philadelphia. I was born and raised there. So spent most of my formative years there, and then went to college in North Carolina. After that, ended up in Colorado. So I used to visit rather often, every other year as a kid. I have dual citizenship, and it's always been kind of a second home for me. But most of my formative experiences definitely are as an Asian American growing up in Philly, and then kind of going all over the country.
And for people who haven't traveled to Asia, do you have any kind of like starter tips? I only, unfortunately, did a layover in Taipei, so I didn't really get to experience it the way I wanted to. The Taiwanese that I have met traveling have been remarkably warm, and very, very friendly and talkative and open people, which you don't really know what you're going to get when you're traveling, especially when you're traveling in places where there's not a lot of shared language.
Sure, absolutely.
Right?
And just to clarify your question, do you mean specifically Taiwan or more so Asia kind of as a whole?
Well, I mean, I know you can't speak to the entirety of Asia, but my experience has been that the Taiwanese have been very, very open.
Absolutely. I would say that Taiwanese people are kind of famously friendly in Asia, and then for people who visit, they generally have a really positive experience there. I would say visiting Asia as a whole, I think the best thing is just to not have any kind of preconceived notions about what it's going to be, but generally it's a very safe place to visit. Generally, the people I think are pretty warm and friendly, even if in certain places they may be a bit more rough around the edges. I don't necessarily think it's because they're quote unquote mean. And then I think the last thing really is just the food. I think that Asian food in every culture, Japanese, Korean, Hong Kong, Thailand, it's all incredible. And there's just a lot of stuff to discover. Maybe throughout this podcast, you'll notice a common theme. Like, I love food. It's like one of my favorite things in the world. And
you get to eat it. So you get to use it so many times in the day.
It's
great.
a requirement.
So many choices.
And it's great. But when you're traveling to Asia, I think that if you kind of end up in a McDonald's eating a burger, I don't want to project, but that to me is, I think, not what you should be focusing on. There's so many amazing things to try out there.
The whole like devil you know versus devil you don't it's a poor philosophy when you're traveling. Mm-hmm. Yes, you're going to walk past the vendors selling unknown meats or snakes or insects and things like that, and approach everything with an open mind, because you never know. My favorite example of this is the sushi movement. I believe it was in the late 80s, how no American would ever eat raw fish. until I think some small shop opened in LA and a few celebrities started getting into it, and now sushi isn't, there's a little sushi area in almost every grocery store in Denver.
Absolutely.
So keep your eyes open. It's not nearly as disgusting as it looks sometimes, right?
Right.
Sometimes you'll open
and
your mind.
disgusting is relative. I think one of the really interesting examples that I always like to point out to like my American friends is that like biscuits and gravy, which is something that most Americans grow up loving, looks like vomit to most people who don't know what it is.
It does.
So it's just one of those things though. It's like, until you have that frame of reference, right, it's really hard to be like imagine like, oh, you're right. This actually does look kind of gross.
Yeah.
I forget what experience it was, but someone pointed that out to me, and they're just like, how can you guys eat that? It's like, it's so good though.
Yeah.
And I think that if you have that kind of aha moment, then it becomes a lot easier to kind of empathize with other people's experiences and the food that they have and everything in their lives.
And travel just opens you up so much to that. Food is just an easy avenue to go down, but you learn so much from traveling. You can't never actually see outside of your own perspective, right? You can't see Evan's perspective just by talking with him, but I can see outside of my own by traveling and getting out of, at least where we are right now, getting out of the American psyche for a bit and seeing things a bit more as a global human as opposed to an American human or a Taiwanese human or something like that.
Absolutely.
I've gotten a little bit more risky with my eating, but I've also suffered Bali belly or whatever the equivalency is in Peru, both times from taking a few chances. But my main piece of advice is that usually you get sick from the fresh vegetables more than you do the not so interesting looking meats. Exactly. It's when you try to eat salads, you don't know how they prepare those vegetables. With cooked foods and especially with fully cooked meats, it's a much safer bet. Yeah, that was my mistake, trying to eat clean and healthy, like getting a fresh kale salad or something in Bali, and I was down for the count for about a week. Well, Evan, I know a little bit about what you're up to, but our mutual friend Nolan introduced us, and I would love to hear about what you're doing here with Nicola Power.
Sure. So I'm one of the co-founders here. I lead product at Nicola Power. We are an energy storage technology company that builds products and software for the emerging energy storage market. And what that means, essentially, the core product of ours is a control software that controls energy systems that utilize energy storage, solar, and grid power. Now, that is a mouthful, but essentially, if you think about renewables as it exists today, typically people think of solar and wind power. These are intermittent sources of energy in the sense that you can't access solar power at night.
Right.
And energy storage is so important because it actually helps us transition from the existing baseline power generation that we have today, typically with fossil fuels, to an environment where we can actually access the power that's generated from the sun. So if you really think about it, the sun's shining during the day, that's when you're getting the most power generation. But as a society and as a grid, we typically encounter our greatest demand for energy right as the sun is setting. You're turning on the lights, you're running the air.
People still working late. There's this crossover period.
Exactly.
Yeah, for sure.
This is oftentimes referred to as the duck curve. But that is what energy storage can help solve. And as a function of that, so there's been a reduction in prices in batteries over the last 2 to 3 years that is making energy storage much more viable. But now the layer on top of it is what are the necessary technologies and software that can incorporate storage more efficiently in this overall grid. That essentially is the technology that we develop, and those are the products that we build for that clean energy future as we describe it.
So is your main end customer like a homeowner or more in the business realm?
We focus initially more in the business realm, C&I, commercial and industrial space. And I think we will move forward towards providing more utility scale services as well.
Please correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like as the batteries develop in their tech, the prices drop, it's going to be embraced by businesses first with budget and then eventually find its way into your garage.
Yeah, definitely. Right. I think there's also just a lot of policy that still drives clean energy as well. And I think that
a lot of turmoil over it.
Yeah. So it's one of those things where storage and renewable sources are becoming much more economically competitive, but there is kind of public policy that definitely helps. What we're looking at is the general litmus is we believe that we can provide value in the commercial and industrial space faster. We can provide more value more quickly. And there's definitely applications in residential, but you typically don't necessarily have, like as an example, the same kinds of demand charges that businesses face. So that's kind of the reason why we play in that space. Demand charges essentially are the kind of increased cost of energy when the grid faces the most demand. So like between 2 and 6 p.m. as people are getting home or people are turning on their lights, the grid is seeing a large surge of demand for energy, and that's when it can cost more to access.
So your main product is the software, correct?
Correct.
And how would that influence, let's say, a new manufacturing business here in Denver? What would be the best application for Nikola Power for a company trying to work with sustainable energy?
Sure. So as an example, in Colorado, the cost of power is relatively low. So I'm actually going to take this example and let's put it to California, just I think it paints a more elegant scenario. But let's
more relevant to the time right now.
Yeah,
totally.
Let's say a manufacturing plant wants to build one new plant, or even for an existing plant, retrofit to more sustainable energy sources. For one, in order to save energy and then reduce their cost of power, and then two, just to access more renewable energy sources. I think it's just something that people are demanding more of. They want to responsibly access clean sources of energy. So what essentially happens is we actually have the ability to develop the asset itself. So that's the solar and the storage, in addition to the technology that would go on the factory. This factory then uses a combination of grid power, solar power, or storage, depending on the time of day and depending on the cost of power. Our software essentially forecasts these variables and optimizes against all of them to save the most money. In a nutshell, that's kind of how that works. A manufacturing plant typically is operating 24/7. There's high power load all throughout the day. Before, without a solar plus storage solution, they may have had to keep most of their power running during the day, as an example, whenever essentially the power is cheaper, and then they would have to either shut down between that 2 to 6 p.m. hour, the time frame, or they would have to just accept the fact that they're going to incur these extremely expensive energy charges.
Yeah. Their cost of goods sold dramatically increases if the product was built between 2 and 6 as opposed to built at 2 in the morning.
Exactly.
Right?
Yep.
So I imagine, please shed more light. I'm very fascinated in this, that a company would store its solar energy through the day, maybe in the beginning part of the day, and then the software would flip and start to draw from that battery cell during the peak hours of the grid energy in order to reduce that cost while maintaining constant power and everything running smoothly.
Yeah. So like in this 2 to 6 p.m. example, essentially what needs to happen at 2 p.m. is you need to not use grid power. So it's really just a bunch of if-and statements that kind of, if you're breaking it down in a very simplistic way. So if you are 100% not going to access grid power for that 4-hour time period, that means that you have 2 options to choose from, solar or storage. We obviously need to have enough battery power to serve that load ready, or we need to know that the sun is going to be shining enough in order to actually operate that load based off of solar power. But yes, the gist of what you kind of alluded to is correct. You're charging the battery when it's cheapest. You're using it when it's most effective. But there are scenarios in which you could theoretically use solar power during that peak demand period instead of just storage if the production is high enough and it can cover your load.
So where is the current technology for these battery manufacturers? Because, I mean, Tesla's obviously the company that comes to mind, but I'm sure there's so many others that I don't know of. My question is more geared to where are these cells heading as far as capacity and availability to the market? And how is your company prepared to interact with? Because it seems like you guys need to be ready to interact with not only all the battery manufacturers, but also with the grid and also with the direct renewable energy sources too, right?
Our technology is chemistry agnostic, which is good. So that doesn't affect us as much. In regards to where the technology lives, I'm assuming you mean like battery chemistries and things like that, just kind of the performance of batteries over time.
Sure. Yeah, it's consistently been the issue why batteries are only lasting a day in your iPhone, and you know what we need the batteries to be up-leveled.
So there is amazing progress in battery technology, and I think that even though we're not happy that our phones only last a day, if you really think about the fact that we have that much computing power at our fingertips, and we can use it for a day, that is kind of amazing. And to me, it's actually indicative of how far batteries have come along. I think what ends up typically happening is battery technology will improve, and then we as consumers will push it to its limit with every refresh.
Very quickly.
Every cycle. Exactly. So
the new landmark becomes the expectation, which becomes unacceptable. It's moving that quickly.
I remember back, I feel like it was like maybe like BlackBerry days.
Sure.
When you would shut off your location services.
Beautiful.
I know,
7-year period where BlackBerry was a predominant company.
But you would actually shut off your location services. And again, this may be like early stage iPhone, I'm not certain, but you would actually shut off your location services because it would murder your battery. You would not be able to use your battery all day if it was accessing your location for all these random apps. So you would be kind of selective about what could access your location and what couldn't. And if you think about it now, in a modern iPhone, Android phone, some people I think know this, hopefully everyone knows this, like it's essentially being tracked. That's just kind of the relationship with technology that we have today.
Right. It's what we choose.
Yep, exactly.
The same service that got me to your office today to make it to this podcast on time is also tracking us at all times.
Exactly. But these types of services, and they're not low power services, are being utilized essentially 24/7. And our batteries are still able to at least offer us a relatively pleasant experience with our smartphones. But it's kind of a bit of a tangent. But I think that batteries will, as with any other technology, continue to get more efficient. They'll continue to get cheaper. We'll continue to find new chemistries and technologies. Currently, the leading chemistry is lithium ion with a massive amount of market penetration. But there's a lot of interesting stuff coming down the pipeline, including like lithium phosphate and flow batteries, and you're not really certain who's going to win.
It's like the race for the new DVD, sort
a
of,
little
right?
bit.
Who's gonna be the winner?
The good thing for us is that we don't necessarily care which chemistry wins,
as long as it works.
Exactly,
and you guys can manipulate it.
Exactly, as long as it works. And for us, I mean, the more storage that gets deployed, period, irrespective of chemistry, that's really great for a company like ours building technology for the emerging market.
It's an interesting point that you bring up about the human expectation with the new iPhone or the next battery that comes out, and how we immediately we're excited about it, we get into it, and then we quickly reach its limitations, and now we're spoiled, right? It's like the first night you're just on this beautiful beach, and you're like, what could be better? The second night was like, well, I wish I had a cocktail with me, and the next night, you know,
diminishing marginal returns,
before you know it, the sunset's just not good enough, right?
Yep, exactly.
You know.
I think it actually brings up a really interesting point that I think is maybe central to the idea of mindfulness. The theme of this podcast is how you are grateful for the things that you have every single day. I mean, I think we find this level of access to be really normalized just because we've experienced it for the last X number of years, and it's just become very normal to be able to access information whenever we want. But without taking the time to slow down and appreciate and be grateful for the fact that we can do this, I think we kind of lose the bigger picture. Realistically, 10 years ago even, I would probably say maybe like 12 years ago, because that's how fast technology changes. Like if you were having a silly debate with a friend over like what is the capital of blank,
it would end with who is the best debater.
Exactly.
Right? That would be it.
Right. Or like whoever like wanted to go to the library or Google it at their computer at home.
Give me 10 minutes to log into the internet, and once we connect, then we'll get to the bottom of this.
Right. And now we can access tons and tons of information. And I actually sometimes fear that we're overloaded with it.
Our brains aren't wired for this. Our brains are wired for lifetime experience learning and learning over repetition and usage. And now we have this instant gratification learning system where if we're having a debate about what's the best battery tech, we're going to pull out our phone and get to the bottom of it very quickly, as opposed to doing our own deep research. And I think that it causes a lot of people in our population to kind of skim. You know, it's kind of like a surfing mentality than it is like a scuba diving mentality, right? Rather than get fascinated in your subject and dive deep, you just are consistently picking away at little tidbits of information instantly all the time. And that's something that I talk about a lot on the show, and something that the products that I'm building right now through the company are seeking to be a solution to.
Sure.
But I feel like it's just murdering our attention span.
Yeah.
And we've been noticing this with the epidemic of ADD, something that didn't exist before and now it exists. And I think that it's really, this is our brain on screens.
Yeah.
And we're just coming up with different ailments to try to explain what that is. It's like, I don't think any human brain could handle the amount of information that could be put in our face on a second by second basis on these phones that are in our pockets calling us at all times.
Yeah. At a macro sense, I definitely agree with you. I'm not sure whether we can or cannot handle that kind of information, but I do know, or I do believe, rather, that we need to be incredibly intentional and have certain frameworks that help us process it, right? So whether we are physiologically capable of handling it, I'm not certain, but I do think that without very kind of specific way of approaching information, and that includes being kind of grateful for accessing information, that includes being intentional about when you're not accessing information and letting yourself recharge. I do think that those types of kind of quote unquote techniques, if you want to call them, are really, really important for us to kind of live happy, fulfilled lives.
Right. Just small disciplines to keep it from running you.
Definitely.
Because there's just more than you could ever possibly consume. And people have become very gluttonous, right?
Definitely.
It's not just a search for information. It's a relief from social situations that you may feel a little bit uncomfortable with. It's a distraction from, I think this is probably one of the strongest dangers in tech, is using social media or just your phone to distract you from the important work that you know you're doing. Using it as a procrastination technique.
Absolutely.
Rather than as a justified reason to, you have to stay in the know. You have to know what the newest, what's going on in the news, or what's going on with your friends, or have to take this call. You know, these have-tos sort of that are, they didn't even exist.
Definitely.
Before the age of the iPhone.
I also think if we peel back the layers one layer deeper too, I feel like this reliance that we have on social media, it also exacerbates our deepest insecurities, and it makes it really, really difficult. I guess it makes it easy to be numb to those insecurities, and it makes it really difficult for us to truly address them.
Yeah.
It's not exactly the most healthy experience to be constantly reminded of the things that you don't like about yourself.
And on such a numerical level too.
Yep.
Everything has a rating. Now, when you talk about social media, you could be doing your life's best work, and rather than fulfilling that with your own pride and completing your best work, you're judging it with the other metrics that are coming around of online performance.
Definitely.
I wanted to ask you a bit about interacting with screens in your profession. I've worked limited amounts in the startup world, but obviously you've been in it for how many years now?
Oh, almost 4. I think that sounds right.
And obviously you're a part of a technology company.
Yep.
Does your company, or do you specifically, have any routines that kind of help you balance and use your tech as a tool as opposed to a toy?
Yeah. So I would say that this is something I'm trying to be better at, but I definitely am trying to keep work at work. And now obviously, like in tech entrepreneurship, it's really, really difficult. There's things that you just have to do after hours. I mean, if there is even a concept of hours versus after hours in entrepreneurship. But I think that when I'm home kind of with my family, currently my family being my wife, I am being very deliberate about not looking at my phone and not trying to check email, and just dedicating blocks of time. This is time for work, and this is time for not work. I feel like it's possible, and it's obviously very, very difficult to do, but it's still something that I'm kind of like working out. I think the good thing is I have always made this kind of decision that the most important thing to me is my family. And while I'm incredibly passionate about technology and building companies, I do this little exercise where I like to think of like extreme examples, right? One example is, or one like alternative future is, my company is super successful, but I have like a mediocre home life. Kids don't really like to talk to me. I'm not really present like with my family, et cetera, et cetera.
It's a common story.
Or I could be really, really present with my family and have a great relationship, but be less wealthy or less successful, however you want to define that.
Right.
Which outcome do I prefer? And in this scenario, it's always the latter.
Does it have to be an either or?
Right.
Right?
Yeah. But I think using that more so as a framework to just identify what do you value more, because I think one of the things that for someone like me, it's hard is before kind of undergoing this exercise, like what's important to you? And I would have just said both. And I think it's kind of almost like a bit of a cop-out, because both of these things are important, right? It is possible to have these things be kind of the most important things in your life, but I think it's still important to kind of understand when push comes to shove, what is the thing that you truly value more. Now, I do think it's possible to have things be valued truly equally, but then I also think that that's an important kind of data point to help us acknowledge and modify our behavior. But anyway, that's kind of a tangent to basically say to that when I'm at home, I like to really be at home and be present. if I'm then working, that enables me to kind of sprint really hard when I'm working and kind of balance that out a bit more. I know that there are some founders I've read who have really interesting policies about like the second they're home, no phone, no email, unless it's an emergency. And they do things like wake up really early to like get more done. And I think there's a lot of ways to go about that. I think that that is incredibly important. And that's kind of what I try to do today to limit my screen time. And
so do you follow that rule of when you get home, the phone goes in the other room? Or do you have any rules that you adhering to right now?
I wouldn't say that I do something as extreme as putting it in a different room. I do think that I try to exhibit a certain level of just discipline. And I think it's really nice too, because I think my wife, she has always been really great about calling me out when I'm not doing that.
Yeah.
And that's something that I desire, right? That's like feedback that I desire.
Yeah, absolutely.
And to be honest, like it's just kind of training your brain, that idea of like forming the neurons to not reach for your phone.
Right.
Because there's a temptation.
Or just having the presence to look at the phone.
Exactly.
And make a decision
right
then and there that is a yes or a no. Exactly. Yes, that is an emergency and needs to be addressed right now, or no, that is going to wait until my hours or I'm back on the clock.
Exactly.
Right?
And I really think about the idea of that kind of treat people as you want to be treated. I think that when we really start to take the time to not subject our friends and our family to, obviously this podcast, you can't see me, but that idea of like, I'm looking at my phone while we're having a conversation, right? Being on the receiving end of that is horrible. I don't think there's anyone who really enjoys it.
No.
Now, we may become numb to it because maybe we do it ourselves. If you think about that evolutionary curve of, okay, we started off without phones and it was rude to look at your phone while talking to someone, and then somewhere along the way it became somewhat socially acceptable. I would actually argue that
it was the text message.
Right.
The text message changed it.
Yeah.
Right. So
it's like kind of socially acceptable to look at your phone when you're talking to someone now. Now, obviously, I think in some circles it's not, as it should be, in my opinion. But I have been in a few social scenarios where it's totally okay.
Yeah, and I imagine in your specific community, especially in the tech world, you know, there's a lot of people who don't necessarily have the same amount of awareness of that social
balance.
Yeah, that social balance and the discretion when it's polite and when it's when you can be on your phone in front of people.
I never really lived in tech in the Bay Area or like in New York, and I don't know if it's like worse there. I do think that the Colorado tech community is really progressive when it comes to that idea of work is work, personal life is personal life. Now that I think about it, I feel like this sentiment that I'm espousing is not that uncommon among my friends who are founders.
Absolutely not.
I definitely feel like we all take the time to be intentional about not looking at our phones when we're with people that we care about.
Yeah.
I'm not really sure why. I have this kind of thing that I say that I think it's amusing how a lot of tech entrepreneurs become pseudo Buddhists and pseudo hippies. And
I'd love to hear philosophy as to why that happens.
I can totally understand like why that is the case. And I don't know if it's just like that's a part of it, but I also don't know if that's just a Colorado thing, because I think
it's more of a trend. We are now firmly into this age of information. And I personally feel like the last 10 years have been so focused on the tech. And now only in the last few years of this new age, we've really realized the dangers of tech, whether it's as extreme as AI and all the dangers that people worry about in that realm, or screen addiction, which is what we're all working with now. So I think that it's like a pendulum. The tech came, the iPhone came, social media came, and it took us way far. And I don't know, we may be even going further in that direction, but I also feel like there's the beginning of a counterbalance of bringing back, like, something's not sitting well. There's some reason why the stress levels of these tech employees or just the population is rising. We're substituting digital connectivity for interpersonal connectivity, and we're feeling hollow. And we're starting to realize that this isn't just an all or nothing benefit. Having all the power of the internet in our pockets is great in so many ways, and it also can be so detrimental to our humanity. So then I would imagine that these incredible intellects, like founders of tech companies and the employees, they're like, well, I need to look for what is the quintessential humanity. And I think that they start looking towards connection with nature and Buddhism and altered states of consciousness, mindfulness, things like that. And I'm so glad that they did, because now we're bringing those new notions into technology, and we're using the network and the platforms and the ability to communicate with millions to share that type of information, not just likes and comments, but also sharing genuinely beneficial tools for the human psyche.
I think that whole journey, at least for me, it really is rooted in the idea of figuring out what actually matters to me in my life. And I think that even before technology, I think just in general, it's very, very challenging for us to find that kind of authentic path because of the social norms and forces that encourage us to be X or Y. I think the idea of success is a concept that I think we talk about it a little too much. And I also think that the idea of success is relative. Like fundamentally, it's relative to the individual. But I think we do a lot of things that say, as an example, is a rich person more successful than a poor person? I think most people would say yes.
I think it's a skewed metric, right? It's not the key performance indicator of that question, correct?
Right.
You know?
And of course, I mean, I think like in extremes, like not having financial resources to live a happy, healthy life, that's absolutely something that we need to think about more and do more about. So it's not necessarily kind of belittling that concept, but I think that there's this kind of misnomer that getting the job or going to the school or getting whatever, the bonus or being famous or, you know, these are the things that we should aspire towards. And I think what I'm saying is that those are things that some people should aspire towards if that is what they find successful. But it's not like that for everyone. And I think by definition, if we need to redefine what our relationship with what success is, then we also need to redefine what our relationship with what failure is. And I think that was probably the catalyst for me being in entrepreneurship is just like people say like you're going to fail a lot. I don't think there's really any way to understand how often you fail in this space until you do it, and you fail a lot. And it just gets to a point where, you know, I think a lot of us spend, I know I did, most of my life trying to avoid failure in any form or fashion
100%.
as much as I could because, one, it's being a failure is the worst thing ever, right? That's kind of a sentiment that is instilled in us since we're kids. But then also failure like feels shitty. So we just kind of found ways to avoid it. And I feel like what I'm really grateful for in doing tech is that it put me in a position where I couldn't help but fail.
Absolutely.
But with that failure also comes growth. And I think it kind of just taught me to think about failure in a really, really different way. And that's my theory on why I think a lot of tech entrepreneurs become this kind of like pseudo-Buddhist, pseudo-hippie, however you want to describe it. I don't like that term. It's the one that I'm using these days, but I don't like it.
Which term?
Pseudo-Buddhist.
Pseudo-Buddhist?
It feels odd. But I think people get what I'm alluding to when I say
a much more creative name will come out, will arise from the internet, you know?
Yeah.
It's
so,
coming.
But I don't know. I think it just kind of teaches us to focus on what really matters to us individually and personally.
Well, I think what you're getting at, something that's been really coming around in my life a lot, is the concept of goals and success versus failure as opposed to developing a system.
Yep.
And I've been very goal-oriented for a long time, and I think it's critical to set goals. But what's the critical difference between setting goals and creating a system is whether like, okay, I want to sell 10,000 units this quarter. That's my goal. But my system is I am a salesperson that will make 50 calls or 50 emails or whatever their performance.
Sure.
I will do this every single day.
Sure.
The system is setting yourself up for success.
Yep.
As opposed to if you don't hit the 10,000, you see yourself as a failure.
Right.
Or if you don't lose the weight or get the job, you are a failure.
Right.
As opposed to I am someone who attempts every single day.
Yeah.
The follow-up to that, which has really opened my eyes, and what I'm hearing you say is that the challenges and the failures that arise are only existent in someone who is moving ahead, is reaching and climbing higher towards their success, correct? The problems that you have today would never have even been on your radar had you not taken the chances and crawled forward before, right?
Yep.
So success, by definition, is understanding that failures are going to be, or obstacles are going to be following you every step of the way because you're taking steps into the unknown. There's going to be things that you don't know how to do. There's going to be things that you're not great at doing, and you're going to have to figure out a way to get through that and get to the next one. And following that obstacle is yet another obstacle. So it really does take a mental system or a spiritual system, a pseudo-Buddhist sort of philosophy to recognize that there is no end to this, right? It's going to happen, and then there's going to be the next one will be right in front of you.
And I think a lot of it too is deconstructing a lot of these concepts like goal setting. It's funny enough, I don't like the idea of goal setting, which is interesting. It's not to say that I don't set goals, or rather, I should say, it's not to say that I don't establish directions, because I think establishing a direction is incredibly important. But I actually dislike the idea of goal setting because I find it to be a little too binary. Either you did it or you didn't, right? And that, I think, is incredibly limiting. Just use your example of like, I want to achieve 10,000 sales. I think the question that I would then ask that is why? Is it because you're trying to get a promotion? Is it because you're trying to earn more money? Is it because, you know what I mean? And I think there's usually a deeper reasoning, a deeper objective behind the goals that we set. And I think that's actually what we should be focusing on, is that greater objective, right? Is the objective, I want to advance my career for whatever reason, right? I think that's great. I think if people want to be career focused, I think that's a wonderful thing. I think just setting those types of like kind of goals, it ends up actually not allowing us to see the forest through the trees. And that idea of like progress, I think, is really important too. But I think progress is not just the idea of like moving forward or moving up, however you want to describe it. I would actually argue that like falling on your face and totally eating shit in whatever you do is progress.
Absolutely, it is. Because you went for it.
Exactly. But it's funny because it's like, without this clarification, if I were just to say like, I think goal setting is stupid, like, I think most people would look at me like I was insane.
I think people are just not very well educated.
Yeah.
They don't see the forest through the trees. Like, it's not that goal setting is the problem. It's that people are setting the wrong goals. And they're not seeing what the real goals are. I don't mind breaking a few bones knowing that they're going to heal stronger.
Yeah.
Correct? And I think that should be the ultimate goal, is to become somebody who will get up no matter what. It doesn't matter how they fall off that horse, what the challenge is, they are going to move forward. That to me is the ultimate goal.
Sure.
I think I put this quote out recently. Eisenhower said that plans are shit, but planning is everything. It's like if you set your 10,000 unit goal and you don't match it, are you done?
Right.
Does that mean you are a failure and now you are to be like shipped off to Siberia? Is that what's going to happen? You know, it's like, no, the idea is like, okay, you didn't get 10,000 this time. It's okay. You learned so much from that process. How will you improve next time? How are you going to be a stronger performer in whatever you're trying to do? And to me, that really is what success is. It's not numeric. It's having a very clear idea of the ultimate, the end goal. And going back to the beginning of this conversation is like, what do you care about most? It's like, well, I care about having a happy family life, and part of that is providing for them, but the biggest part is being emotionally there for them, right? Having that type of foresight and being able to take a step back and see it from the 30,000 foot view as opposed to right in front of your face is critical. I feel like success, it's a moving target. So you kind of have to continuously look back for what is the constant. And I firmly believe that is understanding that failures are going to come and new challenges are every single day. And the muscle to continue to hurdle over those is the answer. We got deep into some philosophy. I love it. I wanted to ask you about kind of your personal hobbies, because I saw on the email you sent me that you've been dancing for over a decade. You're into music, and I love talking music. That's the easy stuff.
I have a ton of hobbies. I think a lot of entrepreneurs are pretty obsessive by nature. I think that that's definitely something that I've had since I was a kid. I'll just kind of rattle them off. I started playing piano when I was 4.
Was that elective, or was that from your parents?
Definitely not. My parents made me do it, and I hated it. I hated every second of it up until recently, funny enough. Well, that's not entirely true. Towards the end of my piano playing career in high school, I was like appreciative of like how decent I was at it. I think lately I've become super appreciative of it. One, not only because I can like play the piano, I think that's really nice, but I think that experience taught me the invaluable skill of how to do something that I don't want to do and do it at a relatively high level. I think that kind of ability to hustle was super, super helpful. I credit a lot of my hours behind a piano to that. So
the discipline. Early discipline to show up. Even on the days that it doesn't feel right or your fingers aren't doing what you want them to.
Exactly.
Before we move on to your other hobbies, I wanted to ask you, why is piano specifically such a challenge? It seems to be like this ancient battle between child and parent, right? The parent wants piano lessons for the child, and the child hates them. It seems like more piano than any other class or any other hobby.
My guess, and this is not super well thought out, but my guess is that piano is not an instrument that most children choose. I think like if you think about pop culture, at least in like the 90s when I was growing up, cool instruments were guitar, drums, and I think that's kind of it, right? And
Absolutely,
and then
yeah.
like you maybe like kind of chose band instrument or like an orchestra instrument, but like the washout rate in those, as we know, is incredibly high. But I think piano is just one of those things where rarely do the kids that participate in them have a choice in the matter.
Yeah, and there's not that many legendary, awesome, super cool piano players out there, right? You know, there's not too many Kurt Cobains of piano or
and
Freddie
like,
Mercury's.
I mean, like, who are the coolest pianists in pop culture today? I would think like John Legend, Alicia Keys, maybe. And like even then, like I would argue that what makes them really cool is like their voice and their overall aesthetic.
Yeah, the showmanship surrounding it.
I don't know if you're familiar with like Franz Liszt. He was known as like a flamboyant pianist back in the day and like super badass, right, in the 19th century. And like, yeah, okay, like in the 19th century, maybe people wanted to be piano rock stars, but I think in the modern era, it's just not. And then on top of that too, I think a lot of parents who try to get their kids to play piano are doing it with kind of positive ulterior motives. I think there's been a couple studies on like the kind of relationship between learning music, in particular piano, with like critical thinking and things like that. I'm not sure. I don't know where I'm citing this, but I feel like that's a thing. But I think a lot of parents want their kids to play piano because it'll be like good for their childhood development. So I think if you're kind of encouraging a kid to do that because it's good for them, it's almost like piano is like the vegetables of action.
That's exactly what I was going to say.
You know what I mean? So it's like
I don't want to eat my broccoli and I don't want to play damn piano.
Exactly.
Right.
So that's
group them together.
You know, not the most.
Sure.
I haven't thought about that. That's actually a really good question. I haven't thought about this that much, but that would be my initial pass.
Yeah.
That's why that is.
I'm in the majority of the population where I, like you, I did not like things that were pushed on me by my parents. My father's a guitar player, and so I actively didn't approach guitar. I wasn't drawn to it. It's funny, when he was growing up, he was into cycling, he was into racquetball, he was into music and guitar playing, and I avoided all of those things. I don't know why. I can't explain why. As a kid, I decided I didn't want to be like my dad or whatever, and now I love all of those things, right? And I always wanted to have more of a piano background. I took a few classes in college when I had the elective ability, and so I have this very, very basic knowledge, and I love having it. But yeah, all these super talented piano players that I've got to work with throughout the years, the ones who started, I've never met someone who was like, yeah, I remember when I was 6, I just loved piano ever since.
Yeah,
it's a very rare
probably
story.
Like 0%. And I think it's funny because, you know, going back to that idea of like gratitude, so I am super, super grateful that I can do this thing because from what I hear, and let me preface this statement, I don't know what it's like to not know how to play piano. I do not remember what it's like to not know how to play piano. But from what I hear from my friends who've tried to learn it as adults, it's like super hard.
Yeah.
Like way harder than picking up a guitar from what I've heard.
It's different. I can speak a little bit on that, but you're absolutely right.
It feels like, and I would love to actually hear your perspective on this.
Sure.
But it's just like your hands aren't coordinated and they're doing two different things at the same time. They don't feel relational. Like it's just really, really challenging. It's easy to like hit a certain point, but getting past that ceiling is, I hear, very, very, very difficult.
Yeah. I can't speak personally because I did manage to stumble my way through like the Moonlight Sonata
that's nice.
For like my second semester. You know, I made it that far, right? And I practiced my ass off to get to that, you know. I was just really into it. I got into it. I was kind of at that golden age of neuroplasticity where like I wasn't so young that I just hated doing it. I was energized by it. I was doing music in college and I took classes because I was interested in it. I was way more interested in passing my piano final than my finance final, which is speaks something about my priorities when I was that age. But with piano specifically, it's so all-encompassing because it has infinite percussive and rhythmic capabilities. It has every range and every note that's in the traditional music, as opposed to with guitar, there's certain rhythms that you just can't quite do. Guitar is also a lot easier to pick up. They're like, okay, here's a guitar, and they can show you 3 shapes on the guitar, and if you bend those shapes around and put them in different orders at different speeds, you can play 300 different songs, and now you have a campfire jam, you know what I mean? And you can carry it around with you wherever you go. There's a million reasons why guitar is an easier beginner, but piano is just so damn fundamental. anything and everything that you could do on guitar and guitar and bass, which is my main instrument. There's representations on the keyboard.
Yeah.
And when you have the knowledge of the keyboard, it opens you up so much to furthering musical development.
That's super cool.
I wish I had more. I'm very thankful that I do have a basic concept of triads, arpeggios, because I play a synthesizer. So I don't necessarily need to have these amazing runs, and I only need to play one note at a time.
Sure.
But having basic theory, it translates into everything, into singing, into working with the rhythm section. Once you're in the studio, it really is like the nucleus of the musical world is on the keyboard.
That's super cool.
But yeah, I kind of wish that I was force-fed some piano at a younger age, because that neuroplasticity, I know that there's companies out there that I'm not aware of that are figuring out ways to prolong and even optimize neuroplasticity in adults. I have to believe that's something that's going on out there, because I've witnessed my 4-year-old little cousin become fluent in Spanish just so quickly, because he's now living in Spain, and it's just happening so fast. Right. And I'm watching his 45-year-old father stumble terribly, and he's in the same setting. Yeah. Right?
Totally. Babies are like superhumans. I mean, like, seriously,
they are. If you like their amount of movement that they do, if you track how much they're engaging their muscles, we would be exhausted with like an hour of moving like a baby.
It's insane.
Yeah, but then again, we also don't take multiple naps throughout the day.
I wish I could.
And just have somebody spoon feed us in between.
Yes.
Right. That would be nice.
Yeah.
So piano, since you were a kid, but I really want to hear about the dancing. Okay, because that's something that is way beyond my capacity.
So dance was something I picked up actually later in life. So I did piano first, then I did soccer. I started playing soccer when I was like 4 or 5, violin at 7, and then I think that was it throughout. And then so dancing was 16. I started learning how to dance because I watched the Usher "You Got It Bad" video, and he does this move that's called a glide, and it was super amazing. And this was an era where getting video, like access to video, was very difficult. Plus, on top of that, I didn't have cable. So
did you like call a number and order the Usher dance?
I think it was like eBombsWorld.
eBombsWorld.com,
and I think they had like videos that you could like download. It was
kind of like the original Instagram, or kind of like Chive. It was just a collection of entertaining or funny things, right?
Stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, but it was website.
So I think that's where I
remember that.
I had this like potato quality video, and I just taught myself how to do it. And it was like where I grew up, Sweet 16s are pretty common. I've realized that actually Sweet 16s are not common throughout the United States. Fun fact.
And just the birthday party, like making a 16th
so
birthday
party, typically for a girl at like a, I don't know, just it's like a big dance party, really.
I never thought about that either.
Yeah. It's like huge in the East Coast. I know it's not big here. I'm pretty sure it's not big in the South.
Seems like a Hallmark holiday, right? Seems like a company may have wanted, or car companies may have wanted to make the 16th a bigger deal so they could sell more cars.
Maybe. I don't know.
That seems like a plausible theory, right?
Yeah, I just think it's fascinating how like it's an exhibit of regional culture that like I didn't realize was regional culture. I thought that everyone had a Sweet 16,
right? But even you just bringing that up, it's like, well, in the Jewish community, the bar mitzvah is at 13.
Yep.
In the Latin community, there's the quinceañera.
Yep.
Those are huge populations that don't subscribe to the Sweet 16. Exactly. It seems like it's very much like a suburban type of holiday.
I totally agree that it's a suburban holiday. So anyway, so that it was Sweet 16 season, right? I'm learning that. So like you get to go to a bunch of dances, and I'm just like trying to make my way through it and trying to be cool, and that's how I got started. And that it started off as this thing of like trying to like impress girls and be cool, which is incredibly embarrassing, but accurate.
Hey, it worked, right?
Yeah, maybe. And then from there, it actually became like a really deep passion of mine. And I really started to dive deeply into the culture. And in college, was able to learn a number of different styles. I started off doing this kind of like pseudo MTV, like ushery, hip hoppy kind of thing. And then in college, I really started to get into breaking. So like b-boying, b-girling, and then like housing, popping, locking. So these kind of like very like original funk styles.
Sure.
You know, breaking kind of like the original hip hop style. And I just got really super into it and trained all the time, like every day, hour or two. Like I did that way more than I should have probably been studying, but I was doing dance instead.
Were you doing it with a group of friends? Were you going to an actual studio? How were you training?
Through friends. So I would say that like studios are, and this is where it's like there's like a fascination, delineation, and culture as well. Studios are kind of seen as like suburban hip hop to some degree. Not obviously like all the time, but typically like in more like underground dance communities, you learn like with your friends, you learn from other people. school, and you just
you learn hip hop through rap battles, not through a hip hop.
You don't go to like a hip hop
instructor
class.
Your hip hop tutor that comes over after class or something.
Just the idea that sounds super whack. So it's just like so that's
a good point.
So that
Sure.
is that's kind of how it happened, and I just was learning and training, and was very fortunate to meet a couple people that were really well known in the b-boying kind of world, and was able just to learn a ton from them. And it's always been like an amazing, I don't know, culture to be a part of. I feel like a lot of people don't have the opportunity to spend time with people who are super passionate about one thing, but maybe are like different in their day-to-day lives. And it's also really great to know that I have access to a community basically anywhere I visit in the world. Like I studied abroad in Taiwan and in Austria, and I was able to connect with the local breaking community and was able to make great friends that I still talk to this day.
Mm-hmm.
When I moved to Colorado for the first time, one of the first communities I accessed was the local breaking hip hop community, and they're still some of my closest friends here today. So
cool.
Yeah.
That's huge. There's something about it all boils down into music, and I love connecting with people all over the world through music.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have the passion or the skills in the dancing that I wish I did.
Yeah.
I remember that every time I go to a wedding, I'm like, damn it, I really should have hit the streets, and started learning from a crew. But no, in Morocco, not being able to speak any common language, but jamming on some drums, trying out some interesting instrument, it just brings people together. And I also have noticed that a lot in the yoga community too. Not necessarily the traditional vinyasa that seems to be so popular here in Colorado and in America, especially acro yoga and areas of partner work where there's like physical touch involved. There's an element of like minimal danger, right? Trust. Trusting, and everybody is mutually outside of their comfort zone. And I think that just makes you so much more vulnerable.
Totally.
That happens in music with improvisation and not knowing when the change is going to happen or if everyone's going to hit it, or, the risk of falling on your face, or in breaking, the very literal risk of falling on your face. And in acro yoga, the very likely scenario of you not landing perfectly. All of these things are involving comfort and trust, and I think that brings people together
definitely
much quicker, and comes back to one of the key themes that we've been talking about today is genuine connectivity versus avoiding discomfort, avoiding boredom. It's fascinating.
Totally agree.
Well, Evan, we're getting close to the end of our window together, but I wanted to ask you, is there any plea you would like to throw out to our audience? Is there anything you'd like to share about Nicola or yourself?
No, I don't know if a plea is the right word for this, but I think kind of going back to what we were alluding to with like goals and things like that.
Absolutely.
I think one of the things that I hope that we all do more is be introspective about why we do the things that we do and why we value the things that we value. I think that understanding what our core motivations are, and I like to use the term North Star, figuring out what that North Star is incredibly important. And it's a very challenging process. It's not fun to do it, but I do think that undertaking it is really valuable. And I think that the connections that we are able to build, both kind of with ourselves and also with other people who are like-minded on this journey, it's really, really empowering and valuable. So that's the one thing that I think I hope more people do. It's something that I try to do every day, and I think it'll be a lifelong journey. But I've started to see some really positive things come out of it, and I really hope that other people can do the same.
I love it. Do you have any specific practices or anything? Because this is what I really nerd out on, is little tips and little tricks and routines that people have to keep themselves on these not so easy regular exercises.
So for me, funny enough, I like to take product management principles in technology and actually apply them in my day-to-day life. So just as an example, I go back to like goal setting. The product management equivalent or project management equivalent of that is kind of waterfall project management, which is like you define a goal, you define your budget, you define what you want it to be. And then 9 times out of 10, what you build is not what you want, it's over budget, and it's late. So it's just kind of like the reason why we do things like lean, agile, buzzword, but the reason why we do things like that is it helps us break down what actually is important in the products that we build, and defining failure and getting feedback in order to not fail big in the future. Right? Fail fast, don't fail big. I think we can apply a lot of these principles to our lives, and I think that earlier plea, I think to some degree is a little bit of that defining your requirements, if you will, figuring out like what actually matters. But in this instance, the customer, right? Typically when we're building products is like what will bring value to the customer. In this example, the customer is you, yourself. It's not like I sit there and I like have a stand up with myself and like run a sprint by myself. That's not what's happening. But I do think that those kind of mental frameworks is definitely kind of bleeding into the way I think about problems and the way I think about where I'm going and why I'm doing what I'm doing. And then when things get tough, as they inevitably will, there's this quote that I really love, which is, if you have a problem and you can solve it, why worry? If you have a problem and you can't solve it, why worry, right? It's a pretty common one.
Yeah.
But I love that. I think it's just
very stoic.
Right. There's the stress that we encounter is definitely there. But I think a lot of stress is self-induced.
I would say that it's 99% of our stresses are self-induced.
Yeah. I would say that too. I'm trying to make fewer sweeping statements. But yeah, I mean, it's just how we interpret the stimulus that's in our lives. But that, I think, like kind of a combination of those factors, in addition to meditation and those things, really, really help me a lot. I overuse the word intentional, but I think just being really intentional about what we do and how we think.
I don't necessarily agree that you can overuse the word intentional unless you're full of shit.
Sure.
Because there's a lot of these words that people use all the time. Like, I know that disruptive was huge a few years ago, right?
Blockchain.
There's a million of them, right? But putting intention and presence into everything you do, it requires this very, very challenging discipline and this awareness of your good and your bad. And it's really scary for people. And so I would kind of expand on what you're saying, but you can't genuinely be introspective until you physically block yourself out to have quiet to do that, right? Because when you're completely consumed with a starting business where there really is no end to the day, when you're working in technology or just pretty much any job at this point, and you have commitments to your phone, it's very hard to make the decision to reflect, to meditate, to write, to really look inward and to see what is your successes, what are your failures, what are you doing right, what are you doing wrong. It's very hard to look at that and take a real look in the mirror when you're like, well, I could do either that, or I could get on YouTube for a while, or I could surf around Instagram, or whatever the hell your vice is. It's until we find a better solution. The only real answer to that true introspection is to physically separate yourself from your screen so that you can dive inward, or at least any sort of distraction. It could be whatever. Evan, how can people get in touch with you via Nicola, if they want to be part of your dance crew? What's
I guess my email's fine. Evan.hung, HUNG, at Nicola Power. That's NIKOLA power.com. I am terrible at Twitter, but I'm trying. My handle is 3VANHUNG. I would say, those are some reasonable spaces, and then we'll start there.
Absolutely. I'll make sure to attach everything in the show notes along with the links to the things that we talked about. Evan, thanks so much for sharing your time with me, man.
Thank you
I'm
for having me.
Really happy to get to know you.
I appreciate that. Me too.
Cool. Cheers.
Thanks.
Hey, everyone. Thanks so much for listening to the MindMill Podcast. If you loved this episode, check out some of the other MindMill episodes. They're all free and available at themindmill.com, as well as all major podcasting platforms. Also, please take a moment to leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. It's incredibly easy and really is the best way to support the show. Stay tuned for more MindMill episodes coming down the line. I'll keep them interesting for you, I promise. Take it easy.